G'day guys, Googs here and you're welcome to my drunk philosophy. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about utopianism. Now what is the idea of utopianism? It's, well, most simply put, you live to an ideal, okay? And everyone in that society would live to that, whatever that ideal was. So, for example, in a peaceful utopia, you would need no war, no violence, pacifism. Everybody gets along, everybody has a good time, and you generally live in peace. And that brings me to the crux sensata, or the soul of this video, which would be that there seems to be a lot of the new hippie movements, whether you call them the anti-fascist movements or SJWs, whatever you want to call it. And a lot of them seem to be looking towards John Lennon's Imagine. Now, if you don't know the song, which I doubt you don't, but if you don't know the song, go for a bit of a refresher, go have a listen to it. It's a great song. And John Lennon was a genius, and I'm not having an attack on John Lennon at all. He's one of my favourite singer-songwriters of all time. But the song Imagine, you know, if we could all live in peace, if we could all be happy, come and join us. We'll all be together, we'll all be one, and we'll all be great. That's a form of utopian vision, but the problem with that style of utopian vision is it's so vague. And it's intentionally vague. I mean, it's not like it was a manifesto or anything. It was John Lennon going, I'm tired of seeing the world at war, and I just wish we could all be peaceful together. But many people have taken this sort of ideal to heart. The only problem with taking the ideal of the song Imagine to heart is, in order to make sure everybody gets along, you have to do we'll say three things. First thing is, you have to put a totalitarian law down, at least one. And that law is a zero tolerance on any form of misbehaviour, which means you'd have to change the legal system, because anybody who disobeys the laws of peace, whatever they are, has to go away forever. Okay? Off to the gulag you go. That's the first thing. The second thing is, you have to have a leadership, right? You cannot have that under the idea of everybody gets along and have democracy, because democracy is competition and it gets nasty. You know, we see that all the time. Labor or Liberal, you know, Democrat, Republic, Labor, Tories over in the UK. It's based on conflict. It's an adversarial system, democracy, and rightfully so. It's two competing opinions or two competing worldviews that you vote on whichever worldview you think is the best worldview to go with at that point in time, and who you believe. So democracy couldn't exist under that regime because it's adversarial. It causes conflict. You can't have peace with an adversarial system. So you'd have to change that. Well, there's only one other form of governance you could go under, and that would be some form of totalitarianism. Because you'd have to keep the peace, right? You'd have to keep the ideal. And the third thing you'd have to do is completely close the borders to your land. And this is something I don't think people realise, is you can't buy into the dream. You can either be a part of the dream to start with, or you're out. So if you were to join, for example, if Australia became a land of peace and plenty, etc., etc., you would have totalitarianism, you would have gulags everywhere, and nobody can come in to live. You just can't do it, because those people more than likely are not going to share the utopian dream that Australia has become. So we then become a completely isolationist nation, or America would do the same. You know, the United States would have to do the same, the UK would have to do the same. So all these people who've got this wonderful utopian dream of we can all get along, we can all live together, sure, we can have that dream. But the end result's going to be exactly the opposite of what you want. Okay? Now, I'm not suggesting we become communist. I'm not suggesting that at all. You know, because these days, of course, if you say, oh, it's going to become totalitarian and you're going to have gulags for the unbelievers and things like that. No, because this has happened before. Okay, in feudalist Christian countries, it was quite often the case where you had very strong national borders. You came into the country, but you had to, you could only do so under the advisement of the crown, and there were lots of people in jails and dungeons or whatever you call it for not living up to the ideal of the state. So you don't necessarily, you could do it under a right-wing government as right-wing totalitarian as much as left-wing totalitarianism. Yeah, now that's how you do it, but there's lots of cons. Let's just say you could do it and not change the system all too much under this utopian ideal of everyone gets along and everybody has the same as everyone else and everybody has respect, etc., etc. There's a problem with that. Bad people exist. And it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what you say. Bad people exist. And all it takes is somebody who at first presents themselves as a person who shares the utopian vision, who has enough charisma to build up enough power, and next thing you know, you're in trouble because the new leader is one bad person, or you get weird cults starting up full of these bad people. It's given how much variance we have in human behaviour, it's impossible to have utopia. Many men and women have tried building utopias in the past and they've failed. The reason they've failed is you can't help human behaviour. Okay? Now, if I could give you an example of a utopian or close to a utopian society as you can get in the current world without going to extremes, Singapore. Singapore is ruled by a tyrant, but a very benevolent tyrant who seeks to help the people. Very strong drug policies. You're not even supposed to spit on the sidewalk. You're not allowed to chew gum in Singapore, okay? There are some pretty harsh rules, but those rules mean that generally everybody gets along. There's very little litter. There's very little problem, right? Now, that's all good and well while that guy's alive, but when he dies and he is replaced, there is no guarantee that the next tyrant of Singapore is going to be as benevolent as he is. Okay, or share the vision that he had. It's quite possible that they would, but you really don't know until that person really gets into power. And this is the problem with utopianism. The other problem with utopianism is, of course, what we found out in the 60s with all the hippie movements. A lot of them started up their hippie communes and they all failed. Every single one of them pretty much to a fault failed very quickly. They were either ended up being led by horrible cult-like figures such as Charles Manson, or they fell apart because they tried to be the anarchist utopia and we all get along, we all grow the vegetables, we all smoke dope all day, and hey, look at us, we're all living free and fancy. And then they realised that maybe 3 or 4 of them were doing 99% of all the work around the place. There was only a few of them that had the skills or the ambition or the ability to be good farmers or to look after the kids or to build the housing or whatever it was. And of course, in the end, people go, well, I'm doing all the work around here whilst you dudes are sitting down smoking bongs. I'm out. This is where utopianism falls down. And this is where the idea as well that everyone should be equal falls down, because no one is equal to anyone else. And as a very wise man, Thomas Sowell, once said, on some days I'm not even equal to myself. And what he meant by that, of course, is some days I have bad days and I can't do what I would normally do. Sometimes I'm sick. So you can't even be equal to yourself in some days. Well, if you can't be equal to yourself, then you can't be equal to other people. Okay, I'm certainly, for example, not equal to a scientist, a great natural scientist. There's no way I'm equal to that person in terms of intellectual ability. There's just no way I'm as smart as that person. Does that mean that I'm lesser a human being? No. But does it mean that they are better at what they do than I am? Definitely. And I'd like to see how many of them would be good at painting like me. I'd wager very few of them would have my particular skill set. Well, does that make me better than them? Well, in painting it does. At the end of the day, trying to measure each other to a copper ring or a brass ring, right, is pointless, because we're just making up where the brass ring sits, and it's completely arbitrary, and therefore you can't measure it. It's sort of like a unfalsifiable concept. The brass ring is an unfalsifiable concept. There you go. We'll leave it at that. Anyway, my name is Nathan Gooks Fletcher, and this is my drunk philosophy, and I'll catch you guys down the track. Hooroo!